As retailers entered the lockdown in March 2020, a small, diverse group of Canadian thought leaders gathered to virtually speculate, collaborate, and share their insights on the waves of disruption facing retailers. The Business of Retail podcast emerged as an unflinching strategic alternative to the conventional discourse, revealing challenges in the headlines and exploring new, unconventional paths for all facets of the retail industry. Now, here's the panel.
Welcome, everyone. My name is Craig Patterson, and this is the Business of Retail podcast. We're joined here today with David Ian Gray, Christine Cowan, George Minikakis, and Gary Newbury. Thank you so much for joining us, everyone. Today, we're going to do a bit of a discussion on Amazon. So the Competition Bureau in Canada is looking into Amazon's activities to determine whether or not some of these are anti-competitive. So fun fact, I actually ended up indirectly working on a bit of this case in terms of putting information together. We were specifically looking at the growth of Amazon in Canada, which has been astronomical, which is probably not a surprise to anyone. At the same time, its total market share of retail sales isn't, significant in terms of what we would see in, brick and mortar, but at the same time, in online sales, it's quite substantial. So we're going to talk a little bit today about Amazon in Canada, the future of it, and I think this will be quite interesting. So,
can I just intervene before you ask all the rest of the questions, Craig? It's my suspicion that in the figures from Stats Canada, that Amazon doesn't feature in those, and therefore when we look at, depending on which percentage you're doing, percentage of bricks and mortar, or percentage of total retail, the figure varies between 10 or 15%, whatever it is. But if Amazon's not actually in those figures at all, we don't know how popular e-commerce is, and if we did know how popular that was earlier, maybe more retailers may have been motivated to say this is a pretty sizable business and we should really invest in it, not kind of do it as we have to do it. So anyway, I don't know if anybody knows if Amazon are actually included in Stats Canada's figures. I get the rumour that they're not, and that must be a big miss.
In the early days of Costco and such, warehouse clubs were not part of the Stats Can capture either, and so I've always kind of viewed, and by the way, Stats Can classifies, you get one assigned category for the kind of retailer you are. So someone like a Loblaws would be a grocery retailer, even though they might be selling a lot of clothing or other items. And so I always find with Stats Can, you gotta look more at the patterning, not the numbers. But I think that's a good point, Gary, that no one talks about. So until now you did.
They also cannot capture how much e-commerce is being done outside the country.
True.
Right?
Yeah, and that's why you
talk about inbound.
Yeah.
You talk about things that are coming into Canada, because they account for it going out. They don't know if it's domestic or international demand because they're saying retail, but when it comes in, we don't know.
Right.
Maybe for another podcast, we can talk about research or data literacy amongst retail leaders, because I find people really don't know how to parse numbers that they're looking at, and often undervalue market research that's done well, but that's where there's other ways to get that, but it's not out of Stats Can or sales data.
That's correct.
Okay. So, sorry, Craig, I intervened because I just wanted to put it on the table, but maybe we're not seeing the whole picture here.
no, absolutely. I think that's really valid because we look at StatsCan. I think starting in 2016, they started properly tracking e-commerce sales in Canada, but they were doing it with retailers that were, I guess you'd say, domestic. And Amazon does not break down their Canadian numbers. We had to go on estimates, and even then, some of that was a little bit dicey. I mean, the numbers were very, very high. But no, that's right. I mean, a lot of Canadians are shopping on sites that are international. Even Wish.com or one of the Alibaba sites. I mean, some of these drop shipping sites do substantial retail sales in Canada, but they're not really going to be counted in those numbers either.
Mm-hmm.
So should we start with the Competition Bureau, or do you want to, there's some other subsets of this question around, a classic phrase of out Amazon, and then perhaps as a follow-on from that, how do our retailers compete in the 2020s and beyond?
Craig, can you, with your legal background, I don't know if this is putting you on the spot, but can you kind of frame for us what the jurisdiction of the Competition Bureau is and how they can't just tackle everything? So what would their leverage be against someone like an Amazon?
Good question. Something I was wondering too, and it was like pulling teeth. We did not succeed. I was trying to actually get some lawyers from big firms to comment on this, to specifically be able to tell us what could happen to Amazon if the Competition Bureau made an adverse finding, basically saying that they were taking too much market share, that they were affecting, well, basically they were anti-competitive as per the definitions that the Competition Bureau would set out. The Competition Bureau, as far as I'm aware, seems to have good teeth in terms of its enforcement. The reason I say that is, when Loblaws bought Shoppers Drug Mart, the Competition Bureau came in and said, you have to, if we're going to approve this, you have to sell some stores. You can't be quite as big as you were. Loblaws was also, I think it was, yes, they were also launching a new concept. I know this because I was reporting on it. We found a story called, I think it was Nutshell. It was a health food chain of stores, and they actually halted that expansion partly because of this Competition Bureau decision when this merger or acquisition, I guess might be more accurate, actually happened.
But what would the criteria be, Craig? Like, is it a certain estimate of share that you can't exceed? Is that really what you're talking about, or
I'd have to check
what makes something anti-competitive in the eyes of the Competition Bureau?
Yeah. I mean, it's a substantial amount, and I have to go and check on that. That part I didn't have to work on in terms of the project, and I haven't, as a former lawyer, dealt with any cases specifically around this. I was in insurance law, so a very different area, but definitely have to check into that. It'd be great to have some sort of, a legal expert that could speak to this, but I think that there were probably some conflicts in terms of some of these bigger firms, because, I reached out to the Faskins, McCarthy's, and they were all like, well, we can't comment right now. And I'm thinking, well, they probably have had Amazon as a client at one time.
I think
so. Can Amazon come back as they've done elsewhere and just say, hey, we're not a retailer, we're basically a platform?
There's always loopholes, right? You never know.
Yeah.
I don't know. That would be interesting if they could come up with that.
But it's interesting that the authorities are, and there's rumors in the U.S. of Department of Justice looking at them. In Europe, authorities are looking at them. So I guess it's an indicator. It could be a long haul, but I guess the premise is, are they anti-competitive in the first place? And I got my views, but I'm going to hold those for a moment.
You know what? My experience has always been that if an acquisition takes you to 20% market share, that's always been the Competition Bureau line of sight. So when you get to that kind of number, you're on radar. So every time we'd made an acquisition, we also looked at market share. What would happen? What would bring us to above that visual line where you get caught. But I'm going to throw something at you, though. I saw something today that in the U.S., and I'm pretty sure, I would be surprised if it's different in Canada, Walmart owns 26% of the grocery market in the U.S. So, it kind of makes you wonder, if Amazon is on the radar, why isn't Walmart on the radar? I mean, that's a huge chunk of groceries. Right.
Well, I think Canada, by that token, Canada's even more concentrated in terms of that sector, food retail, with Loblaw, Metro, and Sobeys, and then you can throw in Walmart here. So yeah, it's very interesting. I
think in the U.S., Walmart is now overtaken. It's the #2 position behind Amazon. And with their launch of Walmart Plus, which is sort of a similar concept around that, they feel that one of the articles I was reading in Forbes this morning, I think they're sort of stating that there's a huge potential of growth because they've been very brick and mortar focused, and so to kind of combine that with they're kind of saying potentially 10% or more. As they get into this online platform. So it's similar to Amazon Prime. It's a subscription. It's $98 a month. But there is that potential that they start to catch up and capture that. And in this article, they were pretty bullish on the fact that they think that Walmart is going to be a pretty sizable competitor. But to your point, like, it hasn't been brought up with the US review. It was Apple and Google, Amazon, and who was the other one? Amazon, Google, Facebook. So we're waiting to hear. They're going to let the announcement out in early fall around sort of their findings and next steps after they all were in front of Congress. So it's going to be really interesting to see what happens.
One of the things that we don't always think about when we talk about Amazon and their disclosed revenue, let's say break out the AWS and all that, and look at the kind of retail business, that something in the order of 50% of that is marketplace. What we're not actually seeing is this: their marketplace sales are like, I don't know, 5% of sales gone through. They don't account for those sales. Those sales are in the books of the suppliers, the dropship people. But there is an argument that maybe Amazon are already the biggest retailer, certainly in the US, maybe in North America, maybe much wider than that, because we're not seeing we get their own products properly accounted for, but their marketplace is only a sliver because it's their commission as opposed to the actual product value. If that was the case, there may be a challenge to say, well, actually, you are, 15% of the market. Forget about sectors of the market. 15% of total market.
You're talking about like influential revenues. In other words, they may not. Yeah. And that's where they kind of get their lawyers on it, and they kind of have all their, The thing about being such a disruptive model is all the systems were built over decades to account for a different reality, and it hasn't caught up yet. And I don't know if we're going to talk today about sales tax, but there's a lot of if you're going to level the playing field, then there's ways to do that with different levers, and that would, I think, be a big one.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
For them and others, right?
Yeah, because I have to share with you that when I buy stuff from Amazon, I actually don't know what I'm paying for. Whereas if I buy something from, say, HBC, I know I've got to add on the HST, but I don't actually know until I've, pressed the button on the end whether or not it's going to have duties or, HST or anything on it. And sometimes, obviously, I'm very pleased when I haven't got it, but it's kind of like that's above the $30 or whatever it is I expected to acquire HST or some other taxes on top of it, but actually it's $40 and it's come in $40 worth. So it's unclear as a consumer what the rules really are. And
well, again, the people who are pro e-com, who tend to be the technology companies behind it, never talk about that. They always talk about how easy. George, the article you shared, which really pissed me off, to be honest. Not you sharing it, just that writer was just being a smartass.
I'll share a few.
but the point is, everyone says, "Oh, look how great online is." I just know someone who last week was ordering from Anthropology. It started on the Canadian site. It must have flipped over. Wasn't paying attention. Everything comes in. Now it's in US dollars, and at customs they add on duties. And they're going, "I wouldn't have bought this, but I've got it now. I'm not going to send it back."
That's crazy.
But that happens more often than people talk about, or at least talk about capture in the business assessments.
But at the end of the day, I'm going to question who's really upset about Amazon. Is it the business world who's upset about Amazon, or is it the consumer that's upset about Amazon? And I think the consumer is probably saying, "Hey, keep lowering the prices, keep giving me variety that I can continue to buy at the best price." And I think that's part of I think that's part of the e-commerce model too. At least that's where it started. And, so I'm questioning who's really wants to call out Amazon on competition issues, because really, look, if they're selling and they have a whole bunch of sellers selling through them as well, then they really can't influence the market as much as somebody else, as a Loblaws or anyone else can, right? Walmart can influence the market substantially.
But so George, that's a good point. And when I first kind of got on my radar, there's more about Amazon than strictly, hey, it's there and live with it. Was hearing Scott Galloway at a keynote in New York a few years ago, and he's very adamant that Walmart has to get curtailed. but he was talking about Department of Justice quietly but very persistently starting to build a case in Europe. Various authorities, their governments have been building a case. But the thing is exactly what you said. Historically, when you look at competition issues, it's around protecting the consumer. And that's why this has been so complicated to tackle, because, as you say, that you could argue consumers love this model. But I can certainly see a world where if Amazon thrives, you're just going to keep eliminating choice. Like, it really is a dumbing down effect over time. And you can argue the choice goes through Amazon, but I think that's the discomfort. And, there's historical precedent around, I guess, Comcast in the US or Microsoft. And again, yes, it was kind of more consumer driven, but these were high flying companies that were, maybe there's some arrogance around them. Like, I remember when Microsoft got decoupled, where they were putting all their suite into their, preloading that on all the computers. You couldn't get, coming from Canada, I knew the people at Corel back in the day. Gary, that'll be a whole other name for you, but they had were perfect, and they had and Lotus, and they were shut out, and it was shocking how fast Microsoft got smacked down on that. Like, when probably behind the scenes it took years, but in the public eye. So I think things are going to happen. I agree with you to whose benefit, but it's a new model, right? So we got to rethink how we approach competition.
And if that does happen, right, how do you prevent, I'm not sure what restrictions Alibaba has or any other other party out there that does. How do you go after them as well? Do you set a broader strategy, legal strategy around this from a competition point of view, that you can't come into the country, or you can only have so much volume? To keep the market fair. I think there's really, it's a Pandora's box that you're about to open.
Yep. And Alibaba, like, we all know, they're waiting to make,
Sure,
the right moment to really open that up. And they're so much bigger than Amazon.
shut down Amazon and they come in. So, and that's what I think the consumer is going to be looking for, that next option.
And I think, to your point, George, it ain't going to be a bricks and mortar retailer, is it?
No.
Kind of thing. So the issue for me around the Amazon Competition Bureau thing is there. And I remember a conversation I had about this time last year with a CFO of a well-known company in Canada, retailer, and he said to me, Amazon, they're bad because what they do is they take your product, if you're, say, a national brand, and they look at it, see the volume on it, and they come out and they find a supplier who can do it cheaper and put the Amazon Basics label on it and put it on the virtual shelf just above it, so that the customer will be persuaded, but this is an Amazon approved product, it's cheaper, we'll get it to you next day, versus one tucked a little bit further back on the virtual shelf, a bit more expensive, maybe not on Prime, that kind of thing. And it made me think about, what happens today when you go into a general store, into Sobeys, Loblaws, wherever, and you look at their visual merchandising of their private label. How different is that? It's just that Amazon are a bit more sophisticated. That's all.
I was going to say, they're just probably sharper on how to do it with their algorithms than the human judgment of Kirkland. But
so I don't have to send in a merchandiser and look at the shelf for a few hours and go, Mrs. Jones has just bought 5 of those, better get a private label. And on top of that, the other side of the CBG, who is sitting there working with, say, a Loblaws and say, we're going to develop this great product for your private label range. Here we are. It's going to cost you a little bit of money to develop it. Okay, we've got it. There it is. Oh, by the way, Sobeys, we've got this great new product label, just a little bit of marketing spend and you'll be fine. So this kind of conduct, my view on this, if Amazon's under the spotlight, surely logically, if we follow that line of argument, surely the other retailers should be under there, because all they're doing is a physical shelf as opposed to Amazon's virtual shelf.
I think
in terms of attacking, if that's what it is, it's kind of like trying to curtail or take the wind out of Amazon's sales. I've been more comfortable with the idea of looking at things like sales tax, any unfair advantage. And the other one is it's ridiculous how much cities and districts, regions will just give freebies away for Amazon to put a DC in. And it's all these incremental decisions add up into what we got today.
Mhm.
The other one they might look at is splitting out AWS from Amazon. Maybe that's another angle, because a lot of what Amazon's doing is, in my understanding of it, at least until recently, has really been run by AWS funds coming across into Amazon. So if Amazon was forced in the public markets to kind of stand on its own 2 feet, then maybe that's a different, I don't know.
Yeah, but at the end of the day, I've
Go
heard
ahead.
that same argument. I've heard that same argument, David. And my rebuttal has been, okay, so Jeff Bezos then decides, okay, here's a check for a couple of $2 billion to Amazon. If you split it up, here's a check for a couple of $2 billion. It doesn't matter where the money's coming from. If somebody's floating this business, what's to stop it from continuing, right? I mean, if you can, where the money comes from isn't the issue. The issue really it comes down to is that it's someone believes it's unfair competition, and they're going to have a tough time proving that the consumer's losing, because no one's lost anything yet. Who's going to lose are the retailers that are large scale, that have not built the infrastructure around e-commerce that they should have 10 years ago, should have started it, and be where they should be today. So right now, what's going to happen in Canada, as it will elsewhere, right now in Canada, it comes down to Walmart, and it comes down to Amazon and Loblaws, right? Loblaws was the first one to lately, as in the last 6 months, to enter the foray and say they're going to improve their e-commerce model. I've yet to see it, right? I've yet to see it. But if that's the case, then you now have 3 players. You've got Walmart and Amazon. And by the way, I was one of the first few people who was saying that Walmart will catch up to Amazon, and they were going to be the competitor, right? That they have to beat.
The brilliance of Amazon, but what makes it in a way hard to compete with is that it really is the everything store, in the sense that once you have Prime, I think the brilliant thing was Prime, because once you've got that, you're going to fill up your basket. And so we've worked with, I won't name the name, but it was a pretty significant cosmetics company. And now you can see where Amazon's being projected to really dominate that category.
Mm-hmm.
But it's the kind of thing where if you're just selling online, the shipping isn't worth someone buying, some face cream. But if you're doing an Amazon order and you're tossing that into the basket to kind of round everything out, and I'm not saying that is anti-competitive in a way that is contravening any regulations. I'm just saying that even if everyone got their e-com game up, there's still going to be some other issues with Amazon. And I think if you look at governments, I'm not going to say right or wrong in this right at the moment, but I think governments, when they've built policies like that, is to look at the societal impact of business that isn't about the dollars and cents going to that business. I think they're going to start looking at employment in retail, job losses, family businesses, family incomes, and you could start building a case that there's a societal negative that's going on with this. And so we're trying to maybe use the wrong instrument, and maybe a new instrument will get developed for that. And I think the Europeans are, because culturally Europe's been much more of a mixed market. I think that's where we're at right now.
I agree.
Wouldn't the argument be, to an extent, for the mum and pop shops, if they were to look at their assortment, just slim it down and put it online, whether Shopify or particularly in this conversation with Amazon, and they can be that drop ship mom and pop shop online and do away with their estate.
Yeah, but Amazon's also dumbing down the pricing. And again, if you're being subsidized, like if Jeff Bezos has said, here's $2 billion, so I want pricing to be at whatever, even if the margin doesn't work. There's a lot of good that's come of it. I think there's a lot of improvement and forcing everyone to be better, but I don't know if it is a purely competitive level playing field. There's just something that feels off about it.
to Gary's point, I think like the Shopify and the Etsy's of the world, especially having, gone through the coronavirus, and you look at mom and pop retail, and, most of them don't have websites. So there's this opportunity to tap into that, I think. And culturally, that feeling of wanting to be more connected to community or to artisans and, people that are doing different things, where you get more of an experience of the brand on an Etsy or on a Shopify. I think that definitely is going to be another area of growth that we'll see, potentially a lot more than, maybe we wouldn't have with the coronavirus, just because now we've got to find other alternatives and people have to find ways to get their brand and their products out to consumers. So I think those two areas, along with Walmart, will, there could potentially be a little bit of a shift. So it's going to be interesting to see how that sort of plays out in the next 18 months.
And also, while we're talking about, say, Amazon and Walmart being, to an extent, Loblaw's got a marketplace. I haven't actually visited it, but if you just look at those two things, and say if I'm either a CPG or mum and pop store looking to present myself online, I can actually play both those channels, and they are in some ways non-competitive, because I'm not sure if they do compete at marketplace level, if there's even a structure to do that. Whereas when I'm on Amazon or on, if I'm going through the store and or e-commerce platform as a Walmart-based product, I am competing. But when I'm on their marketplaces, I think I'm in a kind of non-competitive situation, so I can actually play both those routes to market.
The interesting thing, if there's a whole philosophy here, right? If you're very libertarian or free market, so let's take that point of view. So let's say the shopper gets to decide. The one hope is, and I'm seeing signs of that in some of the research that we've done in the last couple of years, is especially with younger people, they're starting to see that Amazon either is not societally or environmentally great. So they're starting to make some choices to avoid Amazon. And the other concern is just product quality and not really trusting the sources, and the product not being, forget environmental, but just the quality being crap or whatever it might be. So I think it's going to take a long time for that to shift, but maybe that'll open up, as Christine says, some other niche marketplaces as opposed to retailers that tackle that in a different way. There's maybe some better filtering of who gets on board the market. But I think when we've done research over time, and we've always been interested in sustainability, for example, I use that as an example. Humans are really smart. They know their lives, but their lives are complicated. So even people we know that will try and buy organic, and in a survey will say, fair trade, sustainability, organics, all those things matter. On Black Friday, man, do they ever get excited about getting the cheapest, handset or whatever it is. And it's kind of this play that crosses into each other. And I don't know how that, so if we let the market decide, I'm not convinced, even with well-intended consumers, that, and it's not because they're bad people, it's just they're busy, they can't research it all. And man, maybe paying more for organics, they offset it by buying cheap stuff offshore elsewhere. Either we let it play out, or we say, hey, there's some gaps that the market model isn't addressing, and here's a whole new situation we've never encountered before. What do we do about it? But it's going to be Alibaba. Take them out, it'll be somebody else, because it's
yeah. David, you made a good point earlier about the societal issues, and it's either environment, it's either sustaining jobs, all of those elements come into play. But everyone knows that the model is moving, right? And it's shifting. So if COVID sticks around for another 12 to 18 months, that movement to e-commerce is going to continue, right? And the longer it stays on that platform, the more likely it is that it's not going to all shift back again.
Yeah,
right? So
I agree.
The jobs are going to get lost anyway.
Well, a CEO I was just talking to said, he's just saying, if Amazon had a conscience, they could totally there's a big problem right now, which is the shipping, the plastics and the styrofoam chips
Sure.
and all that. The shipping is so unsustainable on e-com. Apple's got so much, or sorry, Amazon's got so much cash sitting aside. Why don't they just throw a huge chunk at that at innovators that they bring on board to tackle a more sustainable shipping solution? But it just seems like culturally that particular organization has no interest. And unless there's some pressure or threat to its existence, maybe that's the good that comes of this, is if they start to get threatened in a way that could hurt, maybe they start to embed some of that internally instead of saying, hey, not our problem.
Yeah.
I don't remember the number, but sorry, Christine, is it 1,000 or 100,000 electric cars, electric vans Amazon ordered? I mean, they were focused on, being ecologically friendly and everything, and this was their first foray into it. And if you think about it, to your point, David, I mean, that is an interesting start. But I agree with you, and you have to ask the question: if you're not investing in sustainability, is it because the retail side of the business is not sustainable? I mean, what's the issue? Sorry, Christine.
Oh, no, you're fine. Yeah. No, I mean, I think we've had some really good conversations about the sustainability piece and the packaging, and, you place an order, there's no way to consolidate. I mean, I know online now, if you're a Prime member, you can choose to do one shipment and lump everything together. But I think just, sometimes logistically, that's not easy for them to get after. So, I think there are definitely a lot of opportunities for them to be a leader in this space. And I think they talk about it. I don't know if they're really walking the walk 100%. Again, like it's just their model is so vast that I think, we as consumers now have come to have that want and need to get something the same day or the next day. And other retailers are following suit. And so you're seeing that. You go into Nordstrom's, you can go, there's sections of the store now where you can, go pick up your product. So, and other retailers are, focusing in on, you've got to be able to ship within 1 or 2 days. So like as consumers, we're demanding that. So unfortunately then, like, what are all those logistical things that go with that and the impact on the environment?
That was the brilliance of Amazon, because we weren't clamoring for that. Mostly, like, it would be rare instances, maybe you needed a medication or something, right? And even that's got issues, but that wasn't us. That was Amazon relentlessly, every media release, just saying this is the gold standard. And eventually you just, hey, that's the gold standard.
Mm-hmm.
But I think also with COVID, like, we've been so accustomed to getting things with Amazon quickly and on time, and we've seen slowdowns there. Yeah. And then you start going out to other retailers. So obviously in the US, Target's another big one, Costco, et cetera. So you start seeing consumers shopping more on different online platforms to try and achieve, their product needs that they've got. If they can't get it on one, they're now starting to shop on others. Whereas I think maybe prior to that, it's just the easy go-to. I'm going to Amazon. I know I can, search what I need, etc. I do think there are a lot of issues with third-party vendors. They're, the quality thing, and to your point, like a lot of just fake product or counterfeit product. And I think that's a real challenging area as well for consumers and for them to deal with, because it's not as trusted a source as, I think we go to Costco and say, I know and trust Costco. If there's an issue, they're going to take it back. No problem, no question asked. And it's not as easy doing it through Amazon's platform.
Yep. Yep.
So what do we think about our Amazon, if I'm going to pronounce that correctly? Do we think that's how retailers should be thinking, and we have to do something better than them in terms of what they're already doing? So if Amazon offer a Prime and offer next day on a very wide selection, we have to do more of that, or is that a little bit misleading in terms of like an intent or strategic frameworking? So you have to just do more of that, or do perhaps retailers need to think a very different kind of way of approaching this problem? Amazon are going to be there. They're still standing after the pandemic, are going to get stronger. How do retailers, and I know that there's lots of different categories and whatever, but in general terms, how do retailers need to think about competing in the 2020s?
Well, I think Staples is doing sort of I like the direction they're heading, which is about solutions as opposed to selling items. So total solutions, which could include services, and there, think of offering as the word as opposed to the product, is about the only way I think of. Once you commoditize something, like if it's, I always use Levi's jeans as an example, but in clothing. So if you have something, the size, the color, you're replenishing. At that point, if you Google, and by the way, that Google was so close to trying to take this on themselves and they backed away from it. But you think about Google still, for many people, the front wedge, right?
Yep.
But you Google and then you just pick, well, where's the cheapest pair of those jeans? If that's the world we live in, I don't know how you compete with Amazon, right? So I think the only answer is to trust that people, when they're buying those, you live with it. But when they're looking at a new pair of jeans and they want to go and understand what they are and get to know the new brand, they're going to need another conduit for it. What's scary about Amazon, of course, is they're opening stores. Like they bought Whole Foods and they're doing the ghost stores. So as George said, things are still in flux. Amazon could buy, I don't know if they would ever buy Williams-Sonoma or something like that that's in receivership, but who knows what the next acquisition is, and they got plenty of cash to do it.
Yeah.
And David, you brought up Levi's. I mean, the one thing about Amazon, that I think of is, I don't really have, say, a brand affinity or saying, oh, I need that Amazon shirt. But there are certain brands out there that are so strong, say Lululemon, Canadian brand, that there's lineups, to get into the stores, and they're doing really strong online sales. I mean, if a brand can create a perception, I think, in the consumer's mind that it's desirable, that is going to give it a leg up on Amazon. Because for me, Amazon is, a cheapness and a convenience factor, but it's not something that I'm saying, well, I need it to be from there. I don't have that brand loyalty to it. My loyalty would only be to the, prime shipping and hopefully a good price.
So
Christine, sorry, I was going to say, Christine, you went through that at Nike, right? Like you guys were debating and then you went in and came out. What's your...
I think, coming from working for two major brands, it's definitely challenging to work with Amazon. You have to work within their parameters. You've got to, set your systems in place and things like that. So I think, there's a lot of expectation on the vendor side of what you've got to do in order to work within that platform. So I think some brands have opted out of it. And I think the cachet too, I think, the direct-to-consumer model, I think Nike's one right now where they're really focused on direct-to-consumer. And here in the US, they've, divested of some partnerships with some brands that are, considered maybe lower tier that aren't representing their product the way they want it represented. So I think you're going to start to see that kind of consolidation back and start to take more ownership and control, more like a Lululemon. I mean, there's a success model there because of how they run and operate their businesses. But what's interesting on the Amazon side, on the fashion side, is they have been slowly kind of focused on fashion, and you're seeing a lot of bloggers posting about getting product on Amazon, which, I typically wouldn't want to shop on Amazon for apparel. But in September, they're apparently launching a luxury offering. So they're trying to partner with luxury brands to bring more luxury product, and they'll, house it in an area. And so, I find that part really interesting because I just don't know as a consumer if I would go to them for my luxury product needs, or I wouldn't go directly to the brand that, I'm interested in to get that product. So I think that's sort of fascinating. They're just starting to kind of foray into that zone.
Mm-hmm.
And
is it cheaper luxury?
I don't necessarily think it's cheaper. I think they're just partnering to try and bring a luxury marketplace, similar to what they've been doing on the apparel side. So whether it's...
So if they're buying a bunch of other stuff, they can add on to the basket.
I think, that's the assumption. It's kind of like, for lack of a better explanation, it would be like Whole Foods. So you've got like the supermarket chain. You've got like a fashion retailer. So, I think...
Only available at Amazon.
Sorry?
Only available at Amazon. I could see it, right? They hire you, Christine. You build the brand for them, only available at Amazon though. That would be the ultimate goal for them, to get into this altogether.
Yeah,
And it would
because
be great for them.
the issue, I mean, I think one of the triggers for Amazon to go down this path with all the choices they have in front of them with pharmacy, et cetera, which they sort of allude to and then back off from while I gather their thoughts, is recently Walmart did a tie-up with ThreadUp, so you can buy second-hand luxury things. And the interesting thing that, in fact, Chris Wharton mentioned, he said, how often do you dial up Coast and land on, Walmart.com? It's not an obvious thing. I go and search for Coast station apparel on Walmart.com, but I'll find it, and it's competitive price because it's second-hand. So I just wonder if the move to luxury is, I want people to dial up Coast or versions of that and land up on Amazon.com or .ca, hopefully. And I just wonder if it's that move by Walmart has accelerated Amazon's choices about which one should we go on next.
If I were to, just go back to your question about what should retailers do. If I were to find a mid-sized retailer that I could buy pennies on the dollars, seriously, and they don't have an e-commerce platform worth singing a song to, I would say to you, okay, then I need to partner with somebody. I need to partner with somebody that I can bring this brand to life, because I don't have the time or the resources to build that platform. And I would actually think about considering Amazon as that partner. Now, I know you may think I'm crazy, but at the end of the day, think about this. I mean, they already know the game. I don't have to go out and learn it, right? I don't have to invest a lot of resources. I have to create a relationship with them, create a contract with them that works in both favors. But at the end of the day, if you're a mid-sized retailer and I can buy you out for pennies on the dollar and keep this brand going and keep people employed at the same time, and you're managing my distribution for me through the channels that you've got, why would I not do that?
I think the only challenge for me is like there's no representation of the brand. So your point, like you're looking for, running shoes, you look that up. There's no way to tell the story of the brand and the brand equity. Whereas on an Etsy or a Shopify, you go into that site, they help to facilitate the sale and facilitate what needs to be done on the back end, but you still retain your brand and the look and feel of your brand. And it would be an easy thing to go on to Amazon to do that, but then I just question it. So, the fact that there's this luxury aspect happening is really interesting to me, because I'm like, what high-end luxury brands, maybe they're just like, this is it, we got to do it. I don't know, but it just seems like you lose that cachet and the excitement of what a brand message can bring on their own platform.
And it's a slippery slope, right? And again, if your pressure is to hit some numbers in the next 12 months, then you start making decisions that may be quite regretful in 5 years. But that happens all the time.
Yep.
And I guess philosophically, my biggest discomfort, if I put it into a nutshell, is I'm very pro-business when it's a range of innovators all trying to solve problems. I think there's nothing better than the business model. I am so uncomfortable with the idea of 1 or 2 or 3 monolithic entities just getting more powerful, because I think in the end, the consumers do lose. And I can't predict how they're going to lose right now, but I just think the bigger, if it's Alibaba, Walmart, and Amazon running everything at the end, somehow I just know it's not going to be good.
I think in the book, The Brave New World, there was only a couple of retailers. So when you look at that futuristic place, right, it was psychotic, really, that it was your duty to go out and shop because that's how you kept the economy going. But I believe there were only maybe 2 or 3 retailers that you had a choice from. So, I'm not saying that's going to happen, but to your point, David, it's not unrealistic that it could happen that way. And it may come down by country. It may come down to a number of retailers, big ones, who are going to control the marketplace overall. And COVID's helping. COVID is really the catalyst that's helping a lot of that take place.
Yep, speeding it up dramatically, right? And shaking out the ones who just can't move fast enough. Chris, I like Christine's point earlier, though, that maybe the future is going to be a rich competition amongst marketplaces. It doesn't solve your brand issue that you just said, but it could. Like maybe a marketplace could really be there and be highly supportive to the brands, as opposed to Amazon saying conform to our model.
Yeah.
You know, maybe you're starting to compete to the different vendors with the different vendors and offering something better. Much like in some ways Lyft apparently is a better place to drive than Uber. So maybe that happens, and I wouldn't mind seeing like a green marketplace that really had reach, as an example. So there's a lot of maybes in play, but I don't. Gary, your question was how do you Amazon, and I. The only way for me would be you could have said that about Microsoft in late 80s, and at the end of the day, it's like knock them down a peg, just put them on their heels a little bit. Microsoft is still an amazing company, still does great, but open the door to level the playing field a little bit. And I do think there's some structural inequities in how, not on purpose, not by any nefarious means by government or anyone else. It's just we either ignore it or we tackle it. But now's the time to look at it.
And when Microsoft, I'm trying to remember everything that happened. When Microsoft though went through all of that and they had to, get their game together differently, who won? I look at Microsoft. It's huge.
Yeah, but I think we all won. We all did better than we would have done without that happening. Because if you remember at the time, you almost had to be like a hack programmer to even add software to your PC back in those days. There's probably going to be people watching this podcast. Well, if anyone watches it, but there could be a few people watching it that are quite young who go, "What's Gary's thing? What's a PC?"
Well, I know people who will not buy an Apple product for the very same reasons.
Yeah, and Apple's now kind of become tougher and tougher, but I think we live right now in a tech world where there's opportunities for upstart tech, like be it music or anything else. There's some room in the landscape, but in those days, Microsoft was really trying to own everything to do with your home computing. And they were well on their way to doing it.
The other thing we haven't talked about is just the brick and mortar piece. And, you look at Walmart and I think they have 90% of their sales are brick and mortar and they've, got their online platform. Amazon's kind of the only one other than their retail stores, or you could argue the businesses that they own, where they don't really have like a brick and mortar presence. And when we go through all this and come out the other side, we're already seeing right now consumers want to get back to retail. They want that physical experience. So, that's going to be interesting to see as, we're shifting to more online, but at the same time, there's still this element of wanting to have the, experience at retail and going into the store and the social aspect of it. So
I think Amazon's going to buy up retail. Like I really do. I think their model down the road will be more of a hybrid than it is today.
Yeah, which would be interesting.
So if that's the case, how does a national chain in Canada think about competing to make sure that they still remain outside the clutches, let's call it, of Amazon?
Exclusives and total holistic offerings, that there too. I mean, Craig, you studied this. What's your thought?
On exclusives in terms of product in Amazon? Because I was actually just looking this up here. I just got a notice that Amazon opens its first fresh supermarket today. As we're just talking about brick and mortar, yeah, I just got distracted here because this notification just popped up. I'm like, oh my God. I mean, they're getting into the physical and it's not Whole Foods.
If chains kind of up their e-com game, they're not going to out Amazon. They don't have the money to leap ahead of Amazon on that. But if they up their game, but then how else? And the two things I'm suggesting are exclusive, like Lulu, exclusive, or your private label. And you've got to have more in your offering than simply the item at a price.
Yeah, I mean, what we're seeing with a lot of companies, especially right now, is number one, having, exclusivity over something, and number two, limited edition or something which creates a level of scarcity. That really seems to go a long way in a lot of respects. We were talking about, Bailey Nelson, or not, sorry, not Bailey Nelson, Brandy Melville.
Right. Yeah.
Brandy,
But apparently now, and this is interesting because it's actually secondhand goods. I mean, this translates to new product as well in different ways, but they had some limited edition runs on certain things, and now they're selling secondhand for hundreds of dollars each because people can't get them. And I know other brands that are doing this, exclusivity. A lot of the luxury brands right now are doing this, and a lot of the luxury stores, I think are, they're some of the best experiential retail, but their products are very highly desirable because there are only really, supposedly anyways, so many of them type of thing. As an aside though, we had some video in the back of the Hermes store in Chicago, and a friend pointed out who actually shops at Hermes. He's like, yeah, they lie. They say they don't have Birkins, but he says, I saw a whole bunch of Birkins in the back there because they were grabbing them and stealing them, right? So, but nevertheless, that's one of the best examples, I think, of the scarcity is, you walk into Hermes store, unless you're a really good customer, they're not going to sell you one of those things. They're like, oh, no, we can't do that. It's ridiculous, but but it seems to work. Everyone wants one. When you're told you can't have something, you're more likely to want it.
yeah, you want it more.
Do we think that, I've been harping on about story-based retailing, having a real clear, defined proposition to solve a problem or a very narrowly defined set of problems, rather than sort of, which many retailers have sort of fallen into, this kind of mass merchandise, just keep adding SKUs and making the stores just a bit bigger, have a few extra categories, chuck those in. I think we've come through the pandemic with an opportunity just to reset this, to reduce our SKU count, to get back to some form of basics retailing or basic shopkeeping. And that gives us an opportunity, does it not, to actually, if we're not going to do a full reinvention, to actually think very clearly and very deeply about some of the stories we need to present to the marketplace that attracts consumers to come to us, which may include online services, but it may not, just focus on that, to kind of differentiate ourselves very strongly compared to Amazon, which is highly commoditized proposition.
I'm using that as a point of departure to kind of think about what Christine said earlier, that Amazon got it into our heads that the gold standard is same-day delivery. So I'm wondering if, and that's a massive communication effort, but I'm wondering if this opens the door to otherwise competitive retailers saying, hey, we're all in this together. Maybe we need to join forces a little bit better. And maybe for some of the others, just try and get the word out that there's a place for that. It's not going to go away, but there's also a place for where people can help you, where there's service coupled with a product. And that's not going to happen with one effort, but maybe just another relentless push of messaging in that direction. Go ahead.
I'm thinking you may be talking about adjacencies, so that maybe I might be a highly focused wallpaper retailer, but alongside me are a plumber and a carpenter or whatever it is, and to actually collaborate at a retail level to say, come to us. It may be a common website to select products from, but you come into each one of our stores, but actually we're happy to refer you directly to our adjacency to get the next bit of the project you're looking to solve.
Yeah, and I think making sure that every time you're doing that, you're kind of reminding people that there's another way than simply item on a sheet, cheapest, click here in a day, that there's other things that are valuable in a retail experience. And because Amazon was very overt, every message had to do with same day. So I think trying to get that out is right. And Craig reported on Shoppers and Rexall, or Staples and Rexall. You know, I'd like to see more of that. I'd like to see more of the, call it rich retailers. I don't mean rich monetarily, but the more complicated, be it online, offline, but offering more branded retail, thinking we can't do it alone anymore. Let's start looking at creative ways we can team up. So that didn't really answer your proposition, but you inspired it by what you said.
You know, we're at a crossroad, right? And we're having this dialogue here about how Amazon is a competitive threat and how it actually impedes growth of other companies and how it could be unfair for the consumer. But on the other side of the coin, there are probably another group of people like us sitting in another podcast saying, how do we take more from traditional retail so we could build e-commerce to make it stronger? You know, and I think that's where this is the real crossroad that we're at. You know, that you've got two worlds fighting to one to grow faster and one to stay alive. And
they're still in the old paradigm, right, George? Because they're still thinking channel specific as opposed to retailing means a rich blend. And I look at HBC as an example, and I know the struggles. I won't repeat those, but when they were trying their reboots, a lot of it involved not having fewer and fewer staff on the floor in these big stores. If you can't compete with people, then like if you can't differentiate by actually overstaffing like Nordstrom does, then you might as well get out of the game, because I don't know how that is better than Amazon.
Right.
Because in fact, you're competing directly with Amazon. If you think of, if you have no very minimal staff on the floor, and you go onto Amazon, you've got. I give an example of going into Home Depot and looking for sugar soap because I wanted to sugar soap the walls and then paint them because it contains phosphates. So I went into Home Depot and found somebody. Said, look, in the broadly the paint session, I said, I want some sugar soap, and they I really looked like I must come on today's banana boat. They really couldn't help me. And similarly, I could have put into Amazon.ca sugar soap, and I wouldn't have got a result. I'm almost certain of it. I haven't tried it. But if I went into a specialist and said, look, I'm looking for sugar soap, and what it is a phosphate coating on a wall that you do as part of its preparation before you paint it. It makes the paint stick on really good, and it cleans up any grease you may have residual. They said, oh, I know what exactly you mean, TSP. It took me a good hour and a lot of frustration to try and communicate that message, which could only have been understood by someone who knew what I was talking about. Amazon don't know what you're talking about when you're doing a random search. If you're doing something for something that you bought before, you can either select the same thing again, or you know what it's called, you key it in. And similarly, as you walk onto HBC floor, you're looking for some kind of weird apparel, and you can't actually find anybody. It's just the same. It's just the same experience, isn't it?
You had me, Gary, because I didn't know what it was.
Craig just sent me a link to sugar soap on Amazon. That was within a click. This reminds me, I used to have lunches with a guy named Rick Kahn, who was in those days at Deloitte. He ran the Western Canadian retail practice. Oh, Gary, I think I introduced you guys back in the day. He's now at Herschel. But he was very bullish on marketplaces and Amazon, and we'd get into these discussions. But I gotta give him credit, because he had a concept that needs to be part of this, which is he felt that there needs to be a critical mass of sales and demand in physical retail, sort of the traditional model, below which the model is not sustainable. So it doesn't mean like you go down to zero. It just means all the investment we have with supply chains, vendors, merch, all our structures do require, and even if some retailers drop away, just as a sector, there needs to be some base level. And his concern was Amazon's going to get you down below that base level, and then even if there is demand, like Gary, you said, for that kind of help, there's not enough to justify having, say, a chain of stores that offer it. And I thought that was really, I thought I couldn't really see the day that happening. But then I also think there's probably loggers in BC who in 1900 couldn't see the day when the clear cuts, destroyed the forest. So I could be wrong and he could be right. I don't know what that threshold is, though. That's the only thing, right? we'll only know after it happens.
I'm still blown away with Amazon trying to bring in luxury brands. I think that some of them were a little bit apprehensive because I mean, they'll be competing against, 24 Sevre or 24s.com, which LVMH owns and has a ton of luxury brands. It's associated with Le Bon Marché, which is the department store in Paris. And, that to me, if you've ever been to that store or even just to the website, My Teresa, there's a few other ones out there that are, really tremendous. Amazon does not feel like a luxury experience. And I just am starting to wonder if, Amazon is barking up the wrong tree or trying to see what's going to stick and is taking those risks, which seem odd because that type of segment to me, just given, the crap that you can find on Amazon, cheap stuff that doesn't work, that has low ratings, it floors me that they think that they could get, Gucci, Prada, and probably not Chanel because they don't sell online, but it just blows me away. I'm like, why are they even trying when you compete on price? How do you compete on experience? And some of these online websites, like Essence, do have an elevated level of experience in terms of customer service. Big uphill battle, I think. And, I study luxury retail and I'm still baffled by this whole thing. I'm like, why are you doing this at this time or ever for that matter?
So Craig, do you think that's messaging for the industry, or do you think that's messaging for mid-market shoppers who are aspiring, much like, say, MacArthur Glen claiming to be a premium, luxury mall when there's a few stores, but mostly it's upper mid?
Yeah, or La Maison Simons, Canadian retailer. Primarily, it's like Zara, kind of that price range. But they they did, and hopefully they'll get them back because they lost the brands temporarily. But they were carrying Balmain and Nina Ricci, the type of $3,000-$4,000 jackets, and they were brought in to elevate the brand in the eyes of the consumer. The consumer says, well, they carry Balmain. Oh my God, not many retailers carry that brand. It's very, very, very expensive. It sets a tone for the retailer where, you look at that $89 pair of pants, maybe you wouldn't have bought them before. Well, they sure look cheap compared to the $1,400 ones that are in the rack next to it, right? So in the case of Amazon, is this a play for us to see them as being premium? I don't know. I mean, if
or just better than bargain basement. Like maybe if the dialogue starts to go to that, you just start to.
Yeah, because you know what? There's a huge difference between premium and luxury to begin with, right? So yeah. I would agree with you, David. You started this, and I agree that that it's their version of what premium or luxury is. They may not necessarily be premium or luxury. It's just taking it a few notches up above from what they may be selling today, and trying to bring that premium and luxury look to pricing down to somewhere else. So. Once again, look, I'm not an Amazon fan completely, but I'm bought and sold on how and what they're doing.
Yeah, it's pretty impressive. I agree, and very strategic and thoughtful. Like they do take a long game view. So.
You have been listening to the Business of Retail podcast, an unflinching strategic alternative to the conventional industry discourse. Thank you for joining us. For more information, please go to www.thebusinessofretail.ca.